Okay, so it's crazy. A lot of people are talking about what Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford should do next after watching those two fight. You know, it's crazy because I predicted Bud Crawford to win the fight from the very beginning, but I never predicted Terrence Crawford to win the way he did. It's insane, man. He's the best boxer on the planet. Shout out to Bud Crawford, great dude, great fighter. I'm so happy for him that he could be up there with the greatest names. Just want to say that first. But to analyze the fight, I mean, Errol Spence really had no chance from the second round on. I mean, the first round was a fill out round. Everyone knew that. And from there on, like, once Terrence, it usually takes Terrence Crawford 3, 4 rounds to figure you out. And in this case, he figured out Errol Spence quicker than he figured out his other opponents. It almost makes me think that Terrence Crawford doesn't try with opponents of lesser opposition sometimes. Like, he almost spares his opponents because he's really a great, tremendous fighter. And it's crazy the way that he really showed that. You know what I'm saying? So I think that Terrence Bud Crawford really plays up to his competition. I think when he fights someone of Errol Spence's magnitude, you see the best out of Terrence Crawford. When he fought Avanesian and when he fought Sean Porter was winning rounds, and I feel like he was almost sparing those guys because Terrence Bud Crawford is the best fighter on the planet, and there's no question about it. Um, you got to give a shout out to Errol Spence for having a lot of heart in that fight. I never thought he was going to win the fight. People kept trying to tell me he was bigger and that Terrence Crawford was too small. He started off at 135 and he's older and he's that B side. And, everybody was talking that talk. And, it was sounding good. But I always knew that Bud Crawford was just different than other fighters. And people really didn't see that. And it was crazy. And now people are talking about that Errol Spence should reactivate his rematch clause and fight Terrence Bud Crawford again in December. And like that's just where I just don't understand what that's where I just don't understand what people are seeing. I don't understand how people can think that fighting Terrence Bud Crawford in 5.5 months after getting beat to a pummel, getting knocked down 3 times, not winning a round, getting your face reshaped. I don't see how people could think that a rematch is good for Errol Spence. I honestly don't know what should be next for Errol Spence. Like, this is the tougher one. Like, we're going to get to Bud Crawford in a minute, but we're going to talk about Errol first. And it's really hard for me to, like, really figure out what we're going to do with Errol because, to me, the rematch, you're not going to win the rematch at 154. You're not going to win the rematch at 147. You got beat to a pulp. Terrence Crawford showed he was levels above you. He was one step ahead of you every time. You have this. You're kind of you do the same thing. You don't really switch, and that's probably why a lot of times Errol Spence was able to get tagged, and he really had no answer for Bud Crawford. And yeah, that was really it. I mean, what I think personally is that Terrence Bud Crawford should continue to chase greatness. He obviously can't fight Charlo right now. Um, we'll dating back to we got to go back to Earl Spence first, and I think Earl Spence. A lot of people are saying he should retire. I think that's a bit harsh. We should see what he wants to do. I think he's a warrior. It sounded like he wanted to go back and fight again. He didn't want the fight to be stopped. So I respect Earl Spence. I think he should definitely get another fight in. I don't think he should fight Bud Crawford. I think fighting Bud Crawford again after that beatdown would just not be a smart move. I think if you care about your fighter, Derek James, if after seeing him get beat up like that, I think you should talk to him, sit down, talk to him, and let him know like Bud Crawford right now is just in a different world. It's his era. I think we need to focus on something else, get our confidence back up, and we can revisit this in a couple years. Maybe fight Keith Thurman. I think Keith Thurman would be a decent option for Errol Spence, considering Keith Thurman's just been talking a lot lately, and I'd like to see Errol get a win, get his confidence back up. I think he would beat the hell out of Keith Thurman, and I'd love to see that. Um, but leave Bud alone for right now. I don't think everyone's saying that he should fight Bud again. I think they don't care about Spence's health. They're just thinking of another mega fight to see it, and I don't think it's smart. And as for Terrence Crawford, you know, Terrence Crawford, he he's the greatest fighter in the world right now. You got to pay your homage to him. I never doubted him really. I had my second thoughts that I thought that Errol Spence might be the bigger fighter. You hear it everywhere you go. You start to think it might be true, but I stuck with Bud for a reason because I knew Bud was a special fighter. I didn't switch my pick, and I think that speaks volumes of my knowledge of boxing as well. Because I know that Terrence Crawford's a special fighter, and I told people that he can adjust, and I thought that might be the difference, and it turned out that was the actual difference. Um, they've given a list out of 4 opponents that Terrence Bud Crawford could fight. The rematch with Errol Spence Jr. He could fight Tim Tszyu. He could fight Jermell Charlo, or he could fight Sharon Boots Ennis. And to me, you got a couple good options here. You know, a lot of people are saying that he should fight Jerron Boots Ennis, and there's no one else in the game that can give him competition. Look, I told y'all from the beginning of this video that Terrence Bud Crawford is on another planet than the rest of these fighters right now. He's the best in the world, and no one can beat him right now. But if we talk about like best fight scenario, like a fight that could give him some go, you know what I'm saying? We got to talk. Jerron Boots Ennis is in his prime, young, great boxer, great jab, knows how to move around. I actually think he knows how to move around the ring a little bit better than Errol. Errol has one move. I think Jerron has a little bit more moves up his arsenal. I think that'd be a great fight, Terrence Crawford versus Jerron Boots Ennis. I would still favor Bud, but can't sleep on Jerron Boots Ennis, man. He's a really good fighter. You got Tim Tszyu, who I think Tim Tszyu's a great fighter. I just don't know how much experience he has. I mean, the thing about Tim Tszyu is he's a knockout specialist, just like Crawford to a degree. I mean, he stops his opponents early. He's a good fighter, but I don't think he's proven enough to really just get the Bud fight right away. That's a little out of reach. I think I want to see Tim Tszyu versus Charlo, or Tim Tszyu versus maybe even a Boo Boo Andrade, something. I need to see him, even though Andrade's 168. It'd be kind of tough to make that fight. There's a lot of fights out there for Tim Tszyu. I think he should get a couple more fights before we say that he deserves the Terrence Bud Crawford fight. Then you have Jermell Charlo, who has to think about Canelo Alvarez right now. So that fight wouldn't even be in the near future. So that isn't a realistic fight right now, if we're being honest. The Charlo versus Bud Crawford fight. Maybe in the near future, because I do think Crawford wants the Undisputed eventually. So that fight will take place eventually. But for right now, I think Bud's got to be thinking about right now. The Tim Tszyu fight could make a lot of money, and it does make a lot of sense. I just think that he's too fast for Tszyu. I think he'll be a step ahead of Tszyu too. Even though Tszyu is very fundamentally sound, I think he's an underrated fighter that nobody talks about. I don't want to disrespect Tszyu at all. I like Tszyu. And then you got the rematch. We can't see the rematch. The rematch should not happen. Like, people need to get that out of Errol Spence's head, if it's in his head at all. I know he said he wanted the rematch after the fight. Derrick James needs to talk him out of that, man. Like, come on. I don't want to see Errol Spence get hurt. He's got no chance to beat. He's got no chance on this planet to beat Bud Crawford. He needs to leave that stuff alone. I'm telling y'all, Bud Crawford versus Jerron Boots Ennis is the fight to make, or Jerron Boots Ennis versus Tim Tszyu would be, or Tim Tszyu versus Bud Crawford would be the next fight to make for Bud Crawford if he doesn't get the Charlo fight or doesn't reactivate the rematch if Spence decides not to. Those are my top 2 options. I think either one of those 2 options could work. But yeah, that's what's really gonna happen, and